I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today, which include Debra Woog from MIT and Jeremy Krell from Chicago Booth. The great thing about both of these former admissions officers is they actually got to have perspectives on both sides of the briefing room, essentially. Both Debra and Jeremy had the chance to be MBA students at their eventual alma mater and then help shape the next generation of students as they come in as former admissions officers.
So I'm Jeremy Krell. I'll give you a little bit of both geographical, professional, and academic background, if you will. So from an academic background, I went to Brandeis University for my undergrad. I went to Tufts University School of Dental Medicine for my dental school graduate degree. So I'm a licensed dentist. And then in addition to that, I went to Chicago Booth for my MBA.
Hi, everybody. I'm Debra Woog. Good to be here with you. And I went to Sloan for my MBA. At the time that I was at MIT as a student, they had a few students participating as admissions interviewers. So that was my first exposure into the MBA admissions office.
So my first question is what does the admissions process look like at an M7 school? Does it differ in terms of, school to school? Are there unique aspects to, for example, Booth that differ from what MIT might be doing? Why don't you kick us off, Jeremy?
Yeah, happy to kick off here. Thanks, Shadman. So, the way I look at this is that there are quite a few common denominators among the M7 schools. Yes, of course, each one, has the liberty and creativity to look into certain, or value certain aspects of an individual candidate or the admissions process a little bit differently, but there's a lot of conserved structures and features to this process, is what I tell students. So typically, the way that it works is once an application is final, complete, and submitted. So when I say complete, I mean every aspect of the application so that review can begin. So your entire application itself, inclusive of essays or personal statements, your resume, anything like that that's required within the actual application portal, the application fee, often have test results, GMAT, GRE, etc. coming in. You have transcripts being sent in, you have letters of recommendation being received. All of these things are complete. We usually get about 2 reviewers to review your application. They will literally go page by page of the application, and they will have a sidebar that asks a number of questions. You can write written responses, and then you will also be forced typically in these portals as a reviewer to, sort of give them a score, numeric score. Once this passes a certain bar, the 2 reviewers have given it a certain level and then can pass to the next level. You often get it issued in an interview. Again, all schools do interviews a little bit differently, but you typically at this point will get an interview offer. They can't interview everybody, which is why they have this initial screening process to begin with. Now you have 3, kind of reviewers of your application. This will go to the broader admissions committee. They differ in size, they differ in composition, but again, current students, staff, faculty, alumni will typically comprise that admissions committee. You'll be reviewed by that group, especially, they typically will go in some kind of order of those that receive the highest rankings across the board. And then admissions offers or waitlist offers or rejections will be issued from there.
Yeah, before we jump into the next question, which is more about the trends and changes that have happened, I want to talk a little bit about school to school. Like, is there anything in particular with Chicago Booth, for example, that it differs from other M7 programs? You don't have to give me an exhaustive list, but I'm curious, how do the schools themselves differentiate themselves in the admissions process?
I'd like to jump in on this if that's okay.
Sure.
So each school has a process that's proprietary to them. The process is evolving over time. So I agree with a lot of the things that Jeremy said. It's team-based. It's never going to be one person who's making a decision by themselves. But as to who exactly is evaluating your application, that really varies by school. There's some schools who do have alumni involved, who do have students involved. There's some students who only the professionals are involved. So it's hard to generalize about the distinctions in the process, and I can't personally comment on the exact details of the MIT Sloan process. But what I will tell you is that it's a holistic look at the student, as Jeremy was saying. So they're never looking at just one factor and ruling people in or out on just one thing.
Great. Let's jump into preparing for the applications themselves for schools like Booth and MIT.
Students telling the same information repeatedly throughout the application. So if you write one essay about how you had a terrific leadership role in a particular activity, explain that when they give you the chance to share that information. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? That's a great place to put that in there. If you had a really rough first year of university and your grades aren't quite as good as they were later.
Yeah, adding on to that, and now speaking about Booth specifically, some of the pitfalls were, for example, some would over-index on what they sort of thought the school was all about. So they'll you may read historically, for example, about Booth, that it is very analytical, and they're looking only for kind of high finance and bankers and consultants, right? You might read this sort of over-indexing on finance and then reflect that in the application because they thought it was what the school wanted to hear, and instead, back to more Debra's point, the school is asking you in the question specifically for what it wants, and it definitely wants to hear your truth.
What are some successful candidates that you saw? What did they do when it came to writing that essay and then nailing the interview while you were an admissions officer? What was some success stories?
Sure. One really sticks out in my mind. The essay, and the first kind of line in the essay was "Spit matters." Spit, S-P-I-T, like from your mouth matters. and the student had gone on to say how they'd done some bench research in the sciences in their past, and ended up understanding all the different biometrics that can be read from saliva, and they went into this entrepreneurial journey, I think, on themselves and family members initially, caught somebody pre-diabetic, really helped that person in their own family. Right. So you really saw this element of personal, this element of professional come out. It was highly differentiated. It was answering the question directly. Right. I think they nailed it.
What I want to pull out from that, too, is that the student that you were referring to, they represented themselves, really, applicants who are trying to be what they think the school wants.
This next section is kind of going a little bit more into the stories that you're talking about, right? You talked about spit matters, and the point of differentiation there. What's another memorable applicant story that kind of shows the audience as well a little bit more on actually how to stand out, right? We all know it's important to stand out and differentiate yourself, but is there an applicant that you saw that kind of gives a good example on how they were able to do it?
Another applicant that stuck out to me was one that used a professional tennis player. I think it was as I recall correctly, it was an open-ended question, something along the lines of tell us something about yourself, right? Or tell us something that matters to you. And you have the option to go personal or go professional or go a blend, right? And so I don't want to necessarily muddy the waters here, because there are some schools that differentiate those questions. One is more clearly personal, one is more clearly professional. Some of them blend them together. So this won't matter necessarily for every school or every question. The schools do change their questions, right? So bear that in mind as I say this. But I am a tennis player myself. I played all through college. I then continued to play recreationally. I follow pro tennis. Probably the next closest thing to my own children that I follow is pro tennis. And on top of that, I am a diehard Roger Federer fan, and still very much in mourning of his retirement. And so when I was reading this, he was not retired, right? And I looked at that and saw right away it was going to be Federer that was the role model, as kind of a subject point in this essay. And I thought it was going to go in one of those directions. Instead, ended up going in the direction of picking on those points where he's facing a break point or a match point and manages to fight them off 10 times to win the match, even though it's the most pressure any person could possibly be under in their career, right at that moment with millions of people watching, and manages to fend points off as if they were any old point, right, in the entire match. That ability to succeed under that kind of pressure is what they picked on in this essay, and it worked really well because they applied that to how they've done that well and where they personally failed. So they opened themselves up, they were vulnerable, and then they used that vulnerability to show where they wanted to improve, right, in the school. So they even fed me some, I want Booth for this reason, even though the question that was probably I would call it on the line in terms of what this question was asking for, right? But they certainly opened up how they were thinking, right? So something that mattered to them or something about themselves. And it's that in that moment of pressure where it really matters, they focus on the end goal and are able to kind of compartmentalize the pressure and see through it and execute. And I thought that was, the way that they did that, not just because of the Federer wrapping, I will say I liked it. It really, worked in the essay and got out, the thought process in a very effective manner.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like find the way to be authentic, but then also zag when everyone's expecting you to zig on your application. I want to talk about, again, just like, let's talk about negative aspects here, because we just talked a little bit about what's been successful. What's an unexpected thing that applicants may not have even thought about when it comes to something that impacts their application negatively? And if you do want to share a positive, surprising thing, go for it as well. But let's first hear about like a negative thing that people tend to underestimate on their application.
I want to pick up on what Jeremy said in his example about vulnerability. I think a lot of times applicants want to show that they've got it all together and everything they're doing is just right. Let me tell you about the time that I did everything perfectly. Here's an essay about that. As a reader, as an evaluator, as an interviewer, I'm actually more interested in hearing the stories that have vulnerability in them, where someone demonstrates their capacity to reflect. I kind of screwed this thing up. This is what I learned from it, or this is how I screwed it up. This is what I'll do differently next time, or better yet, this is how I screwed it up, and this is how I did it the next time something came up, and that worked much better. So anytime that people can show how they're learning and they're growing, that's really appealing to me as an evaluator. And similarly, I think people, when they're trying to look too perfect, that is a negative.
What are some things that you're seeing changing within admissions in terms of the students that are being recruited? Are there certain skills, qualities, and industries or professions that are being prioritized more or performing higher in recent admission pools in the M7?
Yeah, I can add some here. I've seen a couple of areas, definitely ramp up. Entrepreneurship and venture capital has been a big one. These schools, many of the schools boast the number of courses that they have to support entrepreneurs, the number of funding opportunities that they have for student ideas and things of that nature. I've seen that, really ramping over the last 5-10 years. I've also seen healthcare come up. It's a big portion of GDP. The US has a lot of problems, and so do many other countries globally in terms of how much they're spending on healthcare, the outcomes that come with healthcare. So I think I've seen that come up. I've seen a couple of other areas like private credit, things that'll help the population to actually get the money or the means that they need to succeed. I'm not necessarily saying that there's been a total drop off of bankers or consultants, right? I just think some of these other areas are starting to be highlighted a lot more. The other thing I'll say is, especially with the pandemic times in the past few years, and many more applicants in general coming into the application pool, especially globally, I would say there's been a huge emphasis, not that there hasn't always been an emphasis, but an even bigger emphasis now on really mapping the career plan within the application, right? Remember, I know you're fixated on applying to a school or schools, but the school is a stepping stone in a broader career plan, right? So having that plan being well-researched, clearly defined, and achievable, right? Putting together a cohesive and coherent, sort of thought process around where you're coming from, what it is exactly you're trying to get out of the program, and how that's going to get you on to the rest of your career is really crucially important to be very clear about.
What's one piece of advice you'd give someone that's starting their application right now, and how should they be thinking about their decision of where to apply? There's all these great schools. The M7 differs a little bit. They're all kind of known to be great, but how do you go about making that decision, and how should you start your process?
So in terms of the one piece of advice, I would say spend the most time in your application doing two things. One, strategizing, and two, revising and editing. A lot of people think I got to spend most of the time on preparing for the GMAT or the GRE, and then a little bit of time on the essays at the end. And I think that's a big mistake. And also, what's clear to you when you draft something is not necessarily what's clear to anyone else when they read it without knowing the context of who you are. So have your revisions and your edits based not only on your thoughts about how you can be clearer, but get feedback from other people, ideally people who do not know you as well, so that they're not filling in the blanks based on what they know of your life and your career so far. So that's that piece. Deciding where to apply, students tend to go with reputation and brand name, and we've pretty well identified with the M7 what those schools are. A lot of schools will ask you, or have asked in the past, I don't know if they are this coming year, about where else are you applying. And where you're applying needs to make sense. Are you looking for a school that's really large? Are you looking for a school that's really small? Are you looking for a school that has a teaching method that's all case? Are you looking for a school that has a mix of case and projects and problem sets, for example? Think about who you are. How do you like to learn? What kind of environments do you thrive in? And then do the research to figure out which of the schools match your best environment and style of learning.